Good morning. Um, I woke up, was laying in my bed this morning, and had a sudden lightning bolt of inspiration. And I wanted to record some thoughts in the form of some things that I might be trying and some new things that I've learned that might be helpful. And just as a quick update, um, I decided to make a small outline, even though I was like, no, just forget it. I'm going to just spew this stuff out before I lose it. Let's just make this video. Uh, but I happened to scribble down some thoughts, so hopefully I can use it. This video is just briefly going to be about getting the two brain hemispheres to talk to each other and work together. The theme or the belief is that they're actually more powerful when they can work together. And for most things, most activities we do, these systems are spread throughout the hemispheres. This is just based on things I've read in neuroscience. They work together for most tasks, though one hemisphere is usually doing the leading or the majority of the work. So this relates to the brain and the mind, but of course this is mostly going to be about how these things relate to aphantasia and aphantasia, but also like cognition and how we think and how we remember memory. I went to hang out with a friend last night and we had tea, and it came up that she had also had some, well, not just some, but significant amount of, spent a significant portion of her energy and time in life working on things related to brain health and recovering brain health. And I can't remember right now if the word she used was like from a brain injury or if it was just like a genetic thing, but she's had to, really exercise and learn how to become quote unquote normal. We didn't go too far in depth into like the what and wherefore and all those details, but the point was that she had experience and had done a lot of research and had come out of that. And she was saying how that once this, I was explaining how the right mode, the right hemisphere, the visual thinker, how it's been neglected for most of my life, in my case, and how I've been so verbal, thought, language, like left mode, and analytical, sequential thinking focused, and this is true for many people with aphantasia, that they're just running because they don't have any other mode of thought. They can't think in images, can't think in sounds, that they are thinking in words, whether they hear the words in their mind or not. They're thinking in words, they're thinking in language. But when they think in language, they are not picturing the things that their language is representing, which is, I think, the theme of this this little video. One of the major themes is practicing how to get that to happen. So one of the things that my friend had mentioned that had helped her to get both sides like working together was through, or maybe I'm not sure if she mentioned this explicitly, but knowing her background and whatnot, juggling or dance using like both sides. So for example, if you're holding a ball and you toss it to the other hand, you're crossing the divide here between the two sides, and you're getting both sides of your brain to interact. And that's the other thing that I think it's important to mention is when you learn about the brain, it can almost be described as, and has been described as, two brains. You have two brains and they have a bridge in between them, the corpus callosum, and that there are some interesting studies in the 60s and 70s or somewhere in that time period in which people with severe seizures they tested severing the bridge, the corpus callosum. They're called split brain patients. I first learned about these in the book Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Dr. Betty Edwards. At any rate, by juggling or by dancing in a way or with items that involve both sides, and I verified this morning just by doing a quick search that this is actually beneficial for, and there are apparently studies in how this can like train and help with brain communication. So that's one thing that I would like to try. 5 to 10 minutes a day, just juggling. They say to start with scarves or something if it's, your first time, which I have very little experience juggling. But yeah, 5 to 10 minutes a day, just juggling, just to get both hemispheres working together. Like I said, I've described the right mode, the right brain, as perhaps being atrophied, and in the sense of it not being used to its full capacity, or not being given a chance to really speak in its native tongue, if you will, in imagery, mental imagery. I'm going to take a little sip of tea here. Some of the other things that I've been doing include just learning how to write and draw with my non-dominant hand, which is my left hand, which happens to be connected to the right, mostly controlled by the right hemisphere, which is, you connect many famous artists with like drawing with their left hand, which is, I think, interesting and perhaps significant. But I've been writing, and not regularly and not every day for like 30 minutes a day. I'm just like, whenever I get a chance, if I'm sitting and doing something mindless, I'll just be making strokes or writing letters with my non-dominant hand. I've also been brushing my teeth with my left hand, my non-dominant hand. It's slow going, but the neural pathways are being built and strengthened there, and so it's getting easier and feels more natural. The right hand is definitely, with muscle memory and other things, it's still much more dominant, and I can tell the difference. But those are a couple of things that I've been doing. So yeah, that's the first thing I think, is like this idea that the right brain is not being used and has not been used much in this way. The right mode of thinking, which typically lives on the right hemisphere on average, it can be flipped for different people. Apparently there have been scientists who somehow have studied and discovered that sometimes your right hemisphere is in control of and mostly driving speech, as opposed to your left brain. But for most people, like that's the case, and I don't have the numbers, but there are numbers in regards to averages, and yeah. So that's the first part, is getting the right side to like say, here's a chance to hold the microphone, here's a chance to speak. This guy's been hogging the microphone for too long, talking. Let's give him a break. Now, I think my initial idea was to like, okay, you left brain, you just shut up, you go to the side, we're going to let right brain try to do its thing. So let's go in non-verbal mode. And so I've been also practicing and learning about meditation. I don't say practicing, I've just got dabbling in it, dipping my foot in the water. Whether it's just walking and I'm just like the left mind, the verbal mind is just like, I'm not going to think about anything. I'm just going to pay a lot of attention to receiving and interpreting and understanding the physical world around me, whether it's the sounds, the smells, the sights. I'm going to allow that to just like be on and the other one to turn off. And that is one approach, and that is something that I think I will continue to do, is like these meditative nonverbal states can really lead to some amazing places and discoveries, I think. But the point that I'm getting to is that I think there is something more powerful when these two sides dance together. And I kind of mentioned that at the beginning. And I mentioned it to my friend as well, because she was talking about how, like, once you do get that other side, working, then you kind of become like a superhero, because you've had to like rely on this one side for your entire life. And, she had experienced something similar once she had overcome like her cognitive limitations that she had, lived with, I assume, most of her life with. And I can see that, and I expressed to her later on that, yeah, it's kind of like growing up and living with one arm tied behind your back, and then you got both arms, and you're like, wow, I can do so much that I couldn't do before. But I was explaining that, on the other hand, I felt like these things can exponentially like help each other to grow. And so growing up with one side that's just struggling to like do everything on its own, it may have been able to find ways to like accomplish, like I may have been able to find ways to accomplish what I needed to do, whether that's, related to memory, like learning language without pictures, without mental imagery, like all without those things, with no mind's eye. I've been able to do it, but like I haven't actually, like, the full potential of the left hemisphere has not been, it's kind of been given, like it's not met its full, let's say, genetic potential or whatever potential, because it hasn't had a nutritious, food supply its whole life. It's strong and knows how to survive, but it hasn't been thriving because it's been doing it under like the not ideal circumstances. And so in a way it's like, yeah, I can see that too, where perhaps my ability to learn languages and to remember and all sorts of things would have been much different had I had both sides so to work with together, and reinforcing and anchoring memories and anchoring cognition together throughout my life. I don't know. These are just hypotheses and ideas, but it brings us to the point of image streaming and how that is supposed to be a powerful tool for increasing intelligence and cognition. And the idea is that you're imagining these things and you're describing them. And this is like a huge topic on its own that I want to like take a moment. I'm going to get some more tea here and talk about image streaming and a new practice that I plan to try and see how it affects my mind and my ability to remember and how to think clearly. So it's interesting. Image streaming is what actually got me into like learning about aphantasia last year again, and like really diving deep into it. I mean, at least it was one of the first things that came up in regards to like learning how to visualize and like improving your mental imagery. At any rate, I stumbled across it last year. Actually, it was like at the end of 2024, but 2025 was when I really started learning and practicing. But the point is that I quickly learned that when you have aphantasia, image streaming doesn't really work. Like, you can't do it because there's no images to stream. I think that's how I came across it. It was that there was this article saying, oh, I couldn't see, and like this is what I did, and it was like this photographer who had aphantasia or hypophantasia. He claimed aphantasia, but thinking back about it, the way that he described his how he got through it, you had to have some form of imagery, I think. But what he described was closing his eyes, looking at the noise behind his eyelids and the phosphenes, and I'm just learning, how that all happens. So I'm not like probably talking about it correctly, but when you close your eyes and you see, it almost looks like you're looking like at one of these old TV screens where you're not on the right channel and it's just like static. There's not a channel. It's like channel 4, so you can play your video game in the auxiliary input or whatever back in the day. and it's just snow or fuzz, and it's not that busy, but it's like there's, you know, some lighter areas, some darker areas, and sometimes it's, you know, shifting more and sometimes not. And sometimes for someone with aphantasia, like I'm not seeing any shapes come out, you know. And that this relates to autogagia. I hope I'm saying that right. But the point is that people can start, you know, interpreting these things, and their minds will start creating imagery just through the cues of these shapes and differentiate, you know, differences between like light and dark. And as you start to do that, you know, you're basically initiating like this, you know, rub your eyes and you start to see things, and that, I think, starts booting up like mental imagery time. Let's start creating some imaginary things, and let's just start talking about and describing them as we're going through this mental imagery journey. Does not work if you have aphantasia, because there's no mental imagery. All I see is just these things, and if I, you know, these just snow, you know, no shapes, no anything. I mean, there's light, obscure, vague shapes of like, they're not even high contrast. There's differences, and then there's differences between like the lighter and the darker areas, but it's not high contrast. So as I learned sensory thought, I do have the ability to like lay down, think about something. I'm typically trying to do it without words, and think about, or just not lie down, just sit here, close my eyes, think of a Sprite can, think of a Coca-Cola can, think of 11 from Stranger Things, think of a cat. And I can do that in sensory thought and turn off my verbal mind and just like think about the texture, think about the color, but I don't see it. It's not happening. I'm not seeing an image. And that can be boring, and it can be hard because you're not, like, it's not vivid, nothing, no images are coming up. But it is hugely important because I've been able to access old memories from the past. Like, it's hugely important, and I don't want to downplay like how amazing that is, just to sit and to just use sensory thought to think about things and completely shutting off the left hemisphere, if you will, the left mode thinking, and turn off the verbal mind and just like be in that space, whether it's for 5 seconds or long, 5 minutes. It is helpful, and you are building circuitry, quote unquote circuitry, neural pathways, and it's like doing this mode of thought that I've never really done in my life. I've never done it. I've done it like maybe like 3 or 4 times in my entire life, which is 40 years now. And I didn't even realize what I was doing. It was just for like a few seconds. I'm like listening to this music and I'm imagining motion and I'm thinking of concepts, but I'm not seeing anything, and it's like very, very limited. And like I said, it's probably like a handful of times in my entire life. Once I learned what sensory thought was, and like I can do it intentionally, and I can think of like colors, I can think of sounds, I can add more to it because I know I'm not just like doing it haphazardly or by accident. So I know this is like really, let's like get to the point. So image streaming, the important thing about image streaming, which is kind of like the epiphany here, is that it involves both modes of thought. It involves both hemispheres. It's like the juggling. We're getting these things to play together at the same time. One is sparking the other. It's like they're jazz musicians, and they're just like, you play a tune, I'm going to respond to it like this, and let's like build this melody together. Which even just that idea of like these two hemispheres, these two brains like working together, like siblings, it gives me an idea for a story and like a comic that I'm like, oh, I got to write that down, because that would be my, one of my other main ideas for a story one day. Um, but if we have aphantasia, we're not inclined to do image streaming, because even if you learn sensory thought, it's like there's not much to talk about. However, one of the practices that I think I'm going to do, besides juggling, to try to get these, to get these modes, these hemispheres like playing together. And specifically, it's not just like the left hemisphere, right hemisphere thing, like with physical movement. It is, which is great if you want to turn off the verbal mind, apparently, and just like, just move and get them to play together. But it is this new idea or to practice is to do what we used to do when we were kids, learning a language, and we had no other language with which to learn this language. So what I mean is, like, if I'm learning Spanish, I can use English as like a start. Be like, okay, how do I say apple? And then you say manzana, or, how do you say door, puerta? And I can learn the language without any mental imagery. I can learn, and that's how I learned it. I can learn it by using the language that I already have. But how did we learn language in the first place? How do you teach someone who doesn't have any language? Well, what did we do in kindergarten, or before that, when we're learning? I say kindergarten, that was like learning how to read, for some of us anyways. How do we learn language? We observe. We kind of like absorb it. But as parents, we use very simple language, and we would hold up and say apple, apple. And so the young child is looking at the apple, hearing you say the words, and the visual, the imagery of like the visual, the text, the sight, the smell, the texture, all of that is combined with the word. They come together. And so that's the practice. So what I did this morning was I was just laying in bed, and I just started thinking of random things to think about in my very, very weak mental imagery, sensory thought, no pictures, but I can think of them. I can think of the texture. I can think of the whatever, the general appearance, and just started saying random words. Like, for example, start naming fruit, or fruits and vegetables, and I just was like, okay, apple, banana, kiwi, watermelon. And as I'm saying these things, I'm very briefly conjuring my visual memory or my mental imagery. So like, what does that thing look like? I might do another round where I'm saying the same fruits, and I'm thinking of taste along with appearance. So like banana, and I'm thinking of the shape, the color, how it can be mushy. I might say rotten banana or overripe banana. And I'm saying these words, but I'm combining it with the sensory thought. And it's easier because then I don't have to like lay there and be like, oh, okay, what am I seeing? I don't know. It's just like rapid fire training over. It's like, instead of struggling with like, oh, I can't lift up this 40-pound weight, and do like one curl. It's like, okay, let me do 20 jumping jacks, and I've got a lot of movement. Not a good, perhaps, analogy in regards to how physical fitness works, but I guess the point is, when something is really hard for you, just start small and do that thing over and over, and you'll feel like, oh, I did something, and it'll keep you motivated to keep going. So yeah, that's the practice. You can layer that with this other practice, which I think is it's a last topic, and then I'm going to call it for this video. Besides using the verbal mind with, the visual thought mind, the visual mind, nonverbal mind thinking, by, using sensory thought, which if you have questions about how to do that, I'll be happy to share how I learned how to do that. Besides that, which is, I think, the key to encoding your brain to learn that when you hear a word, conjure a mental image of it. Do it automatically and create this spontaneous imagery. And then you'll be doing it all the time. And then because your right mind is working with your left mind all the time, it'll just be your normal pattern eventually, is the hope. But besides doing that, associating that, like creating that association, can be done by just looking at objects, like looking at objects in your room and saying, oh, black picture frame, red couch, fireplace, like, and I'm horrible at this, and this is something that I learned as far as describing what I'm seeing. It's not because I don't know words, but I've gotten bad at describing what I see for some reason. And if I'm writing down on a piece of paper, like, yeah, I can do it like really well. I can write a story and make it really descriptive and take my time. But yeah, I was doing some work where I was having to review, like, I did 100 of them, but there are hundreds of images on a website where they had AI generated alt text, alternative text. If you're not in the web world, it is the text that gets read out loud to people who are using assistive devices to view web pages. So like maybe they can't see what they can't see they're either legally blind or fully blind, and they can't see the photo. So the alternative text, it's text that's an alternative to seeing the photo. And so you hear, instead of seeing the photo of the pine tree in the forest, you would have some text reading, single pine tree in the forest, blue sky and what have you. So I was like reviewing like these AI generated alternative texts. And it occurred to me that, wow, like, first of all, I'll say that good thing that we reviewed it, because it made a ton of mistakes in regards to, I won't even get to it, but good thing we were reviewing it. But when it got the alt text right, it was probably better than most people, and it was on the level of like professional writers and describing these things, and it can do it very fast, because I had to like use AI to like I was like, I'm gonna come up with these descriptions as I go, because there's hundreds of them, and it's like I don't have time to like sit there and think like what's the best alt description. So if there's one that needed to be fixed, I copied the picture, put it into like an AI model, and then it spat out like this description, and I'm like, oh wow, that's great, that's awesome. And I'm like, how would I describe this same photo? And I'm like, wow, I couldn't do that. Like, it's so good. And of course, it's not a human. It probably does it better than most humans, like I said. But a big part of it is because I don't do that in everyday life. People who have mental imagery do that because at times, they will describe what they're seeing in their mind's eye as they're retelling a story about their past. They'll say, yeah, I remember I was walking down the hallway, and they're seeing it, and they're describing like the physical things, but as represented in these mental images. And like, I don't do that. It's an interesting practice in which I, through my work, I'm dealing with abstract concepts, in regards to like programming and working on websites. How do you describe the nature, or describe visually an array, or, the idea of a loop? There's no need to, number one. It's not a job that involves like paying attention to your senses. You're in this virtual world that is perfect for people who are blind mentally. essentially you don't you don't need it. It's not like I'm working and carving wood and I need to look at you know the angle of a cut or the texture. I don't need to feel it with my hand. I don't need to look at the color of it, or as I'm painting it or covering it with some sort of sealant or what have you. um, and so just another practice would be to just like look around you in the room and say, okay, warm hardwood floors, or black coffee mug with a smooth red interior. And then perhaps even after that, this is elaborating on it and combining the two. Say those same words, like black coffee mug with smooth red interior, and think of them in sensory thought. At any rate, these are ways to just play with and experiment with, trying to build a connection, and so that these two modes of thinking can play together and work together. And I think it needs to happen automatically eventually. So just repetition. So that when someone says like rotten banana, that automatically a mental image or sensory thought, in the case of those of us with aphantasia, it occurs naturally, spontaneously. And then we can do it voluntarily. Like we can think of, okay, I'm going to think of a rotten banana, and it becomes easier because we're doing it. So that's pretty much it. I hope some of this was interesting or insightful. Even if it's not, it's going to be a good record for me to look back on, because my hope is that whether it's in 2 years or 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, when I look back, that this new mode of thinking and like being able to visualize will be so much my new norm that it'll be difficult for me to think like, oh yeah, how did I used to think? Like, what was it like? How did I remember without images, like mental imagery? And I'm sure I'll be able to describe it, because it's been like more, it's been my whole life living that way. But it's interesting how when things change, often it's harder for us to remember, like, oh yeah, this part of life was really sucky, because we'll just be like, oh yeah, we'll look back and say, oh, that was such a great time in life, and like, oh, if only I could live back when I was a teenager. And we can sort of forget and repaint the past to be like, oh, I was so free and what have you. And so I don't want to make the mistake of like looking back on my past and saying like, oh yeah, I don't remember how I did that. I've always thought with images, or something along those lines. So it'll be a good record for me in general. Maybe I'll use these as reference in like writing something, or maybe my kids, when they get older, they'll just watch these videos and be like, wow, it's interesting to look back at that time and like look at Dad and see what he was into. But yeah, some new things to try. I hope any of those of you who are doing a similar or on a similar journey or path are, inspired by some of these ideas and try them out, or come up with other things. And feel free to share them with me here in the comments or directly. Let me know what's working for you.